Today, many things have been said in this National Assembly. Many things. But I think the nation always deserves truth. And when members of this side of the House read from the Auditor General's report, it is an independent body that scrutinizes every ministry. Mr. Speaker, much of what was said in the budget with regard to the Ministry of Public Health was quoted from the Auditor General's report previously by members on this side of the House. Mr. Speaker, the obstreperous behavior that emanates from time to time from that side of the House makes me wonder if there was a more sinister reason for cutting the Auditor General's budget. Mr. Speaker, if everything is above scrutiny and can withstand analysis, then there should be fear of nothing coming to light. I would like to say thank you to all the members of staff of the various ministries that would have worked on the various budgets. All of them. It is work. It requires countless hours and tireless work. We say thank you to you. But I'm sure, Mr. Speaker, even sitting and listening of procurement regulations and the registration was asked for by Dr. Frank Anthony of those companies that supply the ministry, we're still waiting on those to date. Mr. Speaker, while there has been an increase in services and specialist services, and I'm happy about it because I worked in the public sector for many years as a doctor, and we know the frustration that we see when things are not available. But Mr. Speaker, while strides are being made in specialist fields, today, for 1 year, hip or knee replacement cannot be done because there is no saw to cut the human bone. That's a basic thing. Mr. Speaker, much of what was told to this House about shortages, machines unavailable, not working, and also basic shortages of things like insulin, which we all know is integral to the management of a chronic non-communicable disease like diabetes. How did we discover these things? The Social Sector Committee of Parliament visited all of these hospitals. These things were not plucked out of thin air. And that sector committee also had not only members of the opposition, members of the government, including the junior Minister of Health. And she acted surprised, like she didn't know these things were happening. And also, because at that time, Mr. Speaker, I was chairing that committee, I want to say clearly, I ensured the media was there, so you actually saw what was happening on the ground. And no one should forget that I was also, by a member of the government, I was almost stopped from entering the bond at the Georgetown Hospital because things were supposed to remain hidden. Mr. Speaker, these are things that are facts. These are not things that are fabricated and made up. Mr. Speaker, there is talk about the accident and emergency unit. I worked in trauma and in the Department of Surgery for a number of years at that hospital. I know that it is needed, Mr. Speaker. I like that it is being talked about, but when you read the budget, it is just discussions. Is it that this will be another mirage? I don't know. Mr. Speaker, we talk about dentistry. What is happening in Region 2 at the Study Hospital? There is no dental chair, and that's why the services can't happen. The thing about it, Mr. Speaker, the member, Mr. John Adams, the honorable member of this committee, did not make the time to visit when we did. A lot of these visits. He went before to put some medications and to say that things were all right at superficial level. But, Mr. Speaker, health is not something that any of us should put politics into. None of us. It deals with the life of people. The life of all people.
Be truthful.
Every life is important, Mr. Speaker, and to try to defend things that have gone wrong is not the way. Rather, The better way is to accept what has gone wrong and try to correct it for the betterment of people. Mr. Speaker, the driver's seat is occupied by this Minister of Health. It lies with her to fix it. The buck stops there. Mr. Speaker, when we think of what's been happening in the Ministry of Public Health throughout this country, we only have to read the newspapers. It gives us an insight into what's happening. Look at the death of the twins born to a teenage mother in Region 3. What can we say about that? That's a high-risk pregnancy right there. A teenager delivering not one baby, but two. Babies died. No investigation. Nothing has come out of it. What happens to the mom and the family? The angst and the trauma that that mother must be going through. Mr. Speaker, let us not bury our heads in the sand and think that everything is all right in health. It's not. I see patients, and all the doctors who still have a clinical practice will be seeing patients, and they'll tell you, we cannot find this, we cannot afford to buy that, and we cannot control our illnesses because things are too hard. Mr. Speaker, VAT is still on health services and things that were once zero-rated. That has not been removed. I can say more. I can read and quote extensively from the Auditor General's report, but I think Dr. Frank Anthony did an excellent job doing that. Yes. Maybe that's why it's hurting so much today. And the kind of defense, the bellicose defense that has been mounted is an attempt to cover what has been happening. But, Mr. Speaker, things do not remain hidden forever. They're revealed and will continue to be revealed because everyone listening today to this budget debate knows the reality that they're facing. Mr. Speaker, the budget 2019 can be described as much ado about nothing. Those of you who know Shakespeare will know exactly what I'm speaking about. Mr. Speaker, it is contrived, it is vapid, and it is not what the Minister of Finance says on page 1 of the budget speech. A budget that guarantees equality and inclusivity in resource allocation for all Guyanese. Who are the people that have been marginalized? Women, the sugar workers, unemployed youth. Nothing has been mentioned in this 106-page document, not one thing. Mr. Speaker, people continue to be frustrated by entities like NIS. Nothing is mentioned in the budget. Mr. Speaker, the vulnerable and poor and marginalized remain just like that. They're trying every day to climb that social ladder, to grapple with the inequalities that exist out there when it comes to income, wealth distribution, access to opportunities and services. It is the reality that's out there. But maybe this government has entrapped itself in an economic bubble, maybe that is being carried by a drone above the current and harsh realities of the Guyanese people. Mr. Speaker, what do we see? We see it in black and white. The figures do not lie. Most of the sectors have contracted, and the small growth rate that is projected is based on the sectors, areas such as livestock. No study has been done to determine how that could be assessed. It is also based on the construction area, and there has been vacillation because items that were used and are used in the construction area have been targeted by VAT. So how is this possible? There has been a rewind, reverse sort of mechanism, impose and reverse, if you want to call it that. VAT put on this year, VAT removed this year, VAT put on and increased this year, VAT reduced this year. What are we really doing? It smacks of total, absolute confusion. Mr. Speaker, how can you say that removing the VAT on concrete blocks will benefit the consumer when the input tax would not have been looked into? Cement and sand and all of the things. The consumer will still feel the burden. How is that going to expand the construction sector? Mr. Speaker, there is a lot of talk about the upcoming oil Everybody is talking about oil. But talk is cheap, Mr. Speaker. What we need to see, and the track record, has really, really left us in dismay, because the stench of the lack of accountability still persists even today. We still don't know where the money is, the signing bonus. There is no infrastructure, there is no proper development of human resources, but oil is coming. The conversation needs to start. Everyone, the conversation needs to start with us. When this oil money comes, how will the government spend it on the sectors outside of oil so that there can be a trickle-down effect to the people out there? That's the conversation that needs to happen. Mr. Speaker, the country continues to be pressurized and burdened by taxes. It is as if every time we get our paycheck, there is one tax or another. Why am I saying that, Mr. Speaker? Because the government has, perhaps going back in time to those, is it a decade, colleague? The decade that was lost. Is it going back to a time where we borrow to fill a hole? Yes, it is. It is called, in parlance, living above your means, putting your hat where your hand can't reach. That is what it is called, Mr. Speaker. What has been happening is incessant borrowing is happening to fill a hole of debt. But is it narrowing that deficit? No, it's not. It's not narrowing that deficit. Because, why? Because spending is wanton, reckless, extravagant, avoidable. You call all the words. Why do we need, and I'll tell you the figures, why do we need more monuments and arches and another Durban Park? Why do we need that? Mr. Speaker, people need to eat. People need to afford health care. Yes. People need jobs. Yes. Women need to have programs that can develop them, that can earn them financial independence. I'm sure if you ask any of the single mothers in this National Assembly, it is a struggle. It is a struggle. Mr. Speaker, what I can say is that this government is disconnected from the reality that exists out there. So this budget is disconnected in everything that it says. So in 2019, because of the government's policy of increasing tax revenues, we will see a widening of the deficit from 41,300,000 to 52 million. Mr. Speaker, my honorable colleague, Minister Jordan, will know what I'm saying when I say our tax capacity is not inexhaustible. It's a well-known financial term. Mr. Speaker, look at what's happening to small businesses. Small businesses are shutting down. Just take a walk in many of the areas of business in this country. New businesses cannot start. What's happening when people go to the GRA and the customs? They submit their documentation and astronomical sums are given to them to pay as their goods are assessed. Is there any wonder why containers are left on the wharves and businesses are closing down? The poor and the middle class continue to be dashed against an unrelenting tax wall. And instead of providing relief and alleviating tax burden, we continue to be in a stranglehold of tax, and more tax. Mr. Speaker, how much tax am I talking about? I'll tell you. The government collected more than 7 million in taxes from tax amnesty.
7
billion in taxes from tax amnesty. The pressure continued. We will be squeezed in 2019 because VAT will increase tax revenue, by 13.8%. Mr. Speaker, I'm not speaking of evasion of taxes. I believe we should pay our taxes. I pay mine. And I also submit my Integrity Commission form. Mr. Speaker, what I would like to see is that the taxes move down to something that is reasonable so that people can look at disposable income, in that you have more money in your pockets to spend. If you want to buy something for your child, you can do it. If you want to do something to your home, you can do it. But Mr. Speaker, value-added and excise taxes alone will increase to 11.8%. Mr. Speaker, imagine someone looking at the increase of the threshold to $64,500, and they're earning just under $200,000. They will not benefit from this, especially if there is an increase in NIS or something that they have to pay. In fact, they'll be taking home less in terms of their salary. Mr. Speaker, I'm sure many of the pensioners will be happy for the tax-free false teeth, but I think maybe the government was looking after its own, because as many as 70% of them will benefit from tax-free dentures. Mr. Speaker, what about the pensioners? Well, there were some things that puzzled me, and I'll read from this book that has become very famous in the Parliament, the Auditor General's book. And what does it say? It says that monies over $1 billion, I'll tell you how much, an unspent amount of $1.654 billion in expenditure was returned by the Ministry of Social Protection. Included in the amount of $1.654 billion is a shortfall of $1.613 billion in the Ministry of Social Services. Mr. Speaker, do you mean to say that the ministry couldn't find it in this money that was returned, that was unspent, to give more than $264 for public assistance per day, or $674 of pension per day? What is this, Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker, how do you equate what's happening? The elderly and the indigent in our country, they deserve some dignity too. Mr. Speaker, I am wondering, how come so much of this money was unspent? Was it an inflated pensioners list? I don't know that, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the measures for those who are challenged, disabled, they're welcome measures. But the reality, can they afford a vehicle with all of these equipment to aid them getting in and out and having a comfortable journey in the vehicle? The point of it, Mr. Speaker, Honorable Minister Jordan, I chat with him from time to time and I make my points known. I'm noted to do that. And I say, why is it that the tax measures or benefits are not benefiting a wider cross-section of the country? Why not? Why ever not? Why is it only confined to small groups of people? Mr. Speaker, yes, small businesses, but you're shutting them down. Think of the energy. Mr. Speaker, energy is a problem in this country. We still have redundant energy, Mr. Speaker, and businesses cannot grapple with this exorbitant cost. Mr. Speaker, the Raman McRae analysis, which I have great respect for, noted also that included in pension costs is an amount of $3,875 million for pension increases, or 20.5% of total pensions and social assistance budget. Given, this is not me, this is that analysis, given the modest salary increases announced by the minister, this provision requires more explanation. Mr. Speaker, what bothers me and what is bizarre in the whole budget, the lengthy 4.5-hour budget, is that pensioners, women, children, youth, the sugar workers have zero to minuscule allocations in the budget. But compare that, Mr. Speaker, to these sums. $713.6 million just for provision of furniture and equipment on the Citizenship and Immigration Services. Adding $5,000 to the pension would be half of this amount. Mr. Speaker, $350 million for the provision of Jubilee Republic initiatives under the Ministry of Social Cohesion. Where is the social cohesion? Do you see it happening? I certainly don't. No doubt, we must celebrate. Celebrate we must, of course. But should we do that by more frenzied and unnecessary spending at the cost of the taxpayers? I don't think so, Mr. Speaker. I think taxpayers want to have some money in their pocket. They will forego an arch or two. They will definitely forego another monstrosity that is there, called Durban Park. But what does this do? None of these expenses contribute to the growth and development of our economy, but they're stark reminders of waste, extravagance, ostentation, and the reality of economic instability and stagnation. Mr. Speaker, what has the Ministry of Social Cohesion achieved? $57.8 million represents provisions for building, security, lights, ceiling, windows for office and resident of the presidency. But listen to this one, $95 million for the provision, this is under the Office of the President, the Ministry of Presidency, for developmental, humanitarian, and other activities. Now, what is this vague provision? A whole $95 million. Is this money for clandestine political work? I need to know. Mr. Speaker, of course, myself and all of Guyana needs to know. Mr. Speaker, the incidence of child and sexual abuse is alarming. We cannot be immune to the pedophilia that occurs and we read about in the newspapers. Over 4,000 cases of child sexual abuse were reported in 2017. For this year alone, in the first 6 months, 481 cases. When will we wait until it gets to 1,000 before a comprehensive program is rolled out? The minister did not mention it in her last budget speech. It's a very thin document. Mr. Speaker, I sound like a broken record when every year I keep asking for counselors. I'd rather be a broken record asking for the right things than doing the wrong things. Mr. Speaker, every year I have asked for counselors in school. Every year I have asked for specialists to provide therapy for children who are suffering from post-trauma disorders of abuse and sexual abuse. Mr. Speaker, by the Minister of Social Protection's admission, the Honorable Minister, there is one psychologist in the whole country. Mr. Speaker, there are 88 caseworkers that service the children's homes and centers across. Oh, let me read it for you, Mr. Speaker. It's yourself, your honorable self, that told me that in response to my questions. I can submit it back to you. Mr. Speaker, every year, $15 million are allocated for scholarships and training. Who has been trained? Mr. Speaker, we have not seen them back in the country. Is it a phantom operation? I don't know. And it has been spent. Monies have been spent. Mr. Speaker, this year, 19 non-governmental organizations will receive $200,000 each. 2 hardworking organizations will receive $12 million each. That's good. My question is, I've seen mushrooming of a number of these organizations we've never heard of in our whole life.
Registered.
The question is, are they registered? Where did they come from?
That's right.
Mr. Speaker, the Raman McRae analysis says this, not me. It appears that subsidies and contributions are being used to favor particular interests and without any rational consideration. Mr. Speaker, when we speak of the Ministry of Social Protection, well, when money is returned, it implies that projects were not executed. Programs didn't happen. It means that the ministry continues to have its hallmark, its signature of underperformance and failure. Mr. Speaker, this is not the first minister. It's like a deck of cards being shuffled. This is the third minister of social protection in just about 3 and some years. Yet again, I don't know what has happened. I have to say, maybe it's gotten progressively worse. I don't know. Clearly, the Child Care and Protection Agency, as was espoused at a recent meeting, needs more financing. But what is the money being used for? And I'll tell you worse. The money is being used for fences. And the Child Care and Protection capital budget has been slashed by 50%. Is this how we take care of our children? Sick, disturbing, horrifying. Mr. Speaker, this government has a penchant, to bother your word, for paint and fences. That's all I can say. Mr. Speaker, I believe the minister did not represent her staff. I believe the staff would like in that ministry for things to work because they've seen the years of progress. They've seen programs implemented, seen the growth of programs. They want more. I know a lot of them. I can't fault them, but maybe your leadership needs to change. Mr. Speaker, all $10 million funded by the Inter-American Development Bank for the social protection strategy remains unspent. No technical assistance was spent on, Mr. Speaker. Does it mean no vision, no plan, so nothing? Probably. Mr. Speaker, Ghana Women's Leadership Institute, that has been a breeding ground for many of our dynamic leaders in this country, a lot of whom sit in the parliament. I see Mrs. Bancroft, I see Ms. Burton Persaud, all of these are from the Ghana Women's Leadership Institute, a white elephant. Nothing is happening there. I checked your last speech, Honorable Minister. Nothing there either. Nothing for women. So once again, the largest, or one of the largest percentages of this population, people who vote to, have been ignored and dismissed. Mr. Speaker, I looked at SLED. This is the Sustainable Livelihood Entrepreneurial Development Program. Mr. Speaker, in 2017, 100 million budgeted, 95 million spent. Mr. Speaker, only 20 groups benefited, and in a response to questions I asked in this House, the minister said these things were never publicly advertised. How did these people know of this thing? How? Mr. Speaker, why is it that Region 6, where there's a large percentage of sugar workers without jobs on a bread line, how come they can't benefit from SLED? Mr. Speaker, $250 million in 2018 budgeted, and still, all I could sense from the people who picketed this honorable house was anguish. One elderly man who worked in the sugar industry for 33 years said to me, why them a punish we? We raise everybody with sugar. That is true. All of us benefited from sugar. Why can't they at least get something from SLED? Mr. Speaker, it is disgraceful, it is shameful, and there's no defense that could be mounted for this ignoring and dismissal of sugar workers. Thousands of them, not 10 of them, severance pay withheld, even though that severance pay was approved in this National Assembly and by the court with interest. It's a shame that they have to picket for what is legally their own entitlement. Mr. Speaker, I am wondering when this disconnect will end. When will it end? Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Social Protection said, let me say, we will continue to work to give the unemployed youth the skills to find decent jobs. We will give the single mother the support she needs to go out and work, to start a small business. The reality is this. Assessment based on the 2017 Global Human Capital Index. Between 2016 and 2017, Guyana slipped by more than 4 positions in unemployment rate. Age group 25 to 54, 7 positions for 55 to 64, and another 9 positions globally with respect for unemployment for youth. That's what you're giving youth, nothing. Mr. Speaker, I can say a lot. I've said a lot, but I would hope that this not be taken in the wrong way, but it be seen as something that can benefit the ministry, what's happening out there, what's happening with people, what's happening with women, children, young people. Mr. Speaker, all of those who have children here, grandchildren here, none of you could say that you have not been approached by a young person with a University of Guyana certificate in hand, or CXC certificates, or A-level certificates, and asked for a job. We all have. Where are the jobs? Are they phantom jobs? We keep hearing of the creation of thousands of jobs, Mr. Speaker. Where are they? Who are benefiting, Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker, who is getting these jobs? But then a senior minister told us just how and who will get the jobs. I say nothing more. Mr. Speaker, the health sector is caught in the throes of mismanagement. And there are crippling shortages that paralyze the health sector, deficient health facilities across the country. A lack of transparency dogs this ministry and will continue to dog this ministry. Why would you want a procurement department in your ministry? There's a national procurement body that you should have adhered to in the first place.
Honourable member, you have 5 minutes remaining.
Putting a plaster on a festering sore doesn't make it right, doesn't erase it. Just like words have the power to haunt, these things have the power to haunt, and they come right back at you. Mr. Speaker, it is the Ram and McRae analysis that made this comment, and I quote them. This violation of law, the audit firm, this violation of law by tainted procurements raises the serious possibility that the 2019 budget, potentially the last full-year budget before the 2020 elections, will be used for discriminatory employment practices and other spending, not only in Ms. Lawrence's ministry, but in the government as a whole. It therefore raises the further question about the extent to which this budget may contain disguised political spending. It's in the Starbuck News. Everyone can read and read more. Mr. Speaker, there is an increase in drug use. I'm sure Security Minister Ramjatan would have taken cognizance of this. More crimes are being committed by young men and women, men in particular, under the influence of drugs. Where is the comprehensive strategy to tackle this problem? The Guyana Secondary School Drug Prevalence Survey Project, which was done in 2013 and launched in 2015, said, so this is what the PPP government left, this was up to now not acted upon, and the minister said in his press conference that we are yet to work out what to do. I'm quoting from your speech, Minister. How long must we continue to hold our breath while we await the transforming of words into action, especially considering 2019 is a few weeks away? Mr. Speaker, I have not yet mentioned something that bothers me and should bother everyone. All the feasibility studies that amount to $6 billion. $6 billion, millions of dollars per page. So which means this is a mirage. Feasibility studies, as everyone would know, does not necessarily mean this was translated into a reality. Yet billions of dollars are spent on things which may never, ever happen. I want to put that out there.
You have 2 minutes remaining, honourable member.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Guyanese are looking for practical measures in this budget that will impact on them, their family, their environment, their businesses, their security, and the budget is a big fat zero. Mr. Speaker, children's education is a problem. Healthcare is a problem. And I'd like to borrow from a sitting member of this House. I hope I can find it. The Honorable Mr. Carl Greenidge, who says, a budget could be the largest it ever is. In other words, it has taken all the GDP, which means, in fact, when this budget gets larger and larger, it is taking a larger share of the income that one earns. Mr. Speaker, that's what's happening. All we do is give. What do we receive? Nothing much. Mr. Speaker, the Honorable Minister has not provided palpable benefits to all of Guyana. He has not. The Honorable Minister has danced around, adding frills and fripperies instead of substance to what it should have been. Our Treasury continues to be hemorrhage, and there is a problem with accountability and transparency. Corruption is the order of the day. Mr. Speaker, I can say that. Mr. Speaker, I can say that. I can say that without fear, Mr. Speaker. I can. Mr. Speaker, all the successive generations born will be born with a tax debt, with a debt on their heads. Mr. Speaker, generations are being mired in debt because of this government's proclivity to borrow, and borrow. Mr. Speaker, coupled with mismanagement and misappropriation, we are in for nothing but trouble. Mr. Speaker, the daily struggle to make ends meet is real with the escalating cost of living. Just look at inflation, the paucity of jobs, unemployment, unconscionable taxes. But you know what, Mr. Speaker? I have great faith in the public. There will come a time when they will say, enough is enough. And Mr. Speaker, I cannot be. Mr. Speaker, the masses will speak. Mr. Speaker, the masses have spoken in various strikes. The teachers have, the parking meters have, all these people have spoken. And Mr. Speaker, I believe people are hoping for something different. The stench is too much. Mr. Speaker, I will tell you this. I cannot, in all honor and honesty, support a budget that is anti-poor and filled with all of this. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.